Hello and welcome to this video tutorial on research as a process. My name is Melissa Huang and I'm the Information Literacy Librarian at Western Colorado University. And today we're going to talk a little bit about why does it matter? Why should you bother watching this video? Right? I'm going to lay down some information that we don't usually talk about in academic circles. I'll show you a little visual metaphor for research. We'll talk about some research steps and end off with some Google tips, how to Google like a pro. Okay, so why does it matter? Why should you watch this video, right? When you have a limited amount of waking hours and so many things to do in them, right? So a couple of reasons. First, the frustration, right? A lot of times you'll be assigned a paper and you'll have to choose a topic pretty much instantaneously. And at that point you might start to wonder, well, how do I know what I'm interested in? How do I know that this topic already hasn't been written about in its entirety, right? And that's the thing, is you don't know. Professors may sometimes act like you should know. You may feel like everyone else knows what they're doing and that you don't, right? But rest assured that you are not alone. And at any level of research, you can come up with a topic that you think is going to be great. You do a little bit of preliminary research, right? And you're like, wow, this seems awesome. And then as soon as you start to get really into it, you find out, hey, it's already been done by a 19th century German, who just had some free time on his hands. And he, figured out everything there was to know about this topic. Too bad. Sometimes it happens that way, right? The research process is not as linear as people like to imagine that it is. It's not simple and clear-cut, and sometimes you end up with a topic that's already done. And at that point you may have to change either topics or angles, but we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. This second image here is a little chart, basically representing the increase in knowledge in the past, I don't know, 100 years, several hundred years, all of human history, basically. If you imagine the x-axis as time, the y-axis then indicates the amount of publications and knowledge freely available to people, right? So a couple hundred years ago, if you wanted to study up on emus or some other topic, you would have to go to where a book about emus lived, right? You'd have to visit a library and be the type of person that would be allowed into a library. Everyone thinks that Game of Thrones is unrealistic, but the depiction of the library with the chained up books is actually based in reality. At one point, books were more valuable than pretty much anything else, right? But today, we kind of have the opposite problem, right? There's so much information out there that it's almost, guaranteed that someone has already written something about a topic you're interested in, right? And that gets me to my next point, which is that mostly undergraduate research and even graduate research up to a PhD is more about finding out what has already been written about a topic, a field, or a sub-discipline, right? That leads me to my visual metaphor, research as trailblazing. So, if you imagine a discipline or a field of study as a forest, then you can start to see that research is almost more about a strategic stumbling around or wandering, right? It's very, very rare that you can simply go from one step to another and go, okay, well, I have this topic and it remains the same topic throughout the course of your study or research. Oftentimes you'll bounce, back and forth between things, figuring out, okay, well, I definitely have this tree. I know all about this tree. I've read through this article about this tree. And from there, once you've oriented yourself a little bit, you can use the one tree that you've found to discover other trees or maybe paths that other people have taken. So this is where you would get into maybe the works cited of that article or book chapter, and figure out where those routes lead, right? What kind of water have they been drinking? Um, as with all information today, it's critical to be able to examine that information analytically, I guess. So, what affiliations does this author have, right? Was this paper sponsored by an institute or a think tank, somebody who's sponsored by, the Cattlemen's Association or something? You kind of have to be aware that every person's writing is affected by their experiences, right? Every word that they choose to use is backed by their upbringing and their experiences to that point, right? So when you're looking at research as trailblazing, I want you to, set aside the ideas that you should be able to know exactly where you're going from the get-go and see it more as a strategic exploration, right? People often think that it goes something like this. You have a topic and then you get some keywords and then you start searching and then maybe changing up your search a little or refining it. Then maybe, after that you can pick some good results and save those, right? But in reality, it's more like, well, you've got your topic, maybe you're thinking about ocean pollution, so you start with those keywords, but then you realize, okay, maybe those keywords aren't quite right. Maybe you're looking at marine pollution, maybe you're looking at oceanic seas, all kinds of words that you might add in there to change it, right? After doing some research on that, you might realize, okay, well, maybe I'm not actually interested in oceanic pollution. Maybe I should do fracking instead. So you restart the whole thing and you keep on working at it, basically, to find something that you're interested in. The thing about keywords, especially now in the age of online research, is that the keywords define your search and define everything else about what you can do to find more information, right? Every single discipline, because of human nature being so tribal in essentially, every single discipline develops their own vocabulary. Sometimes we call that jargon. So, board gamers will talk about meeples without explaining them. And so too do scientists and other academics really get into their own topics that way, right? Once you start talking to only experts in the field, you stop worrying about defining every word that isn't commonly used because you have the assumption that everyone knows what you're talking about, because usually they do, right? So it's pretty important to go from more general sources of information like encyclopedias and that kind of thing to more narrowly defined ones like research articles, right? There's a huge, huge difference in the way the voices of those particular publications sound, right? Encyclopedias are written for everyone to understand, right? Whereas articles and, to a lesser extent, books and book chapters are a lot more narrow in their audience, right? They're only trying to talk to other people in the field. So typically people will believe that, this is a very linear, straightforward process, but in reality, it's more like, you see oceanic, but then a lot of other people are using marine, so you start doing that, and that sets you off on a different track because you're getting mixed results with naval ships and, the U.S. Marine Corps, and your search is getting all kinds of muddled up, right? So one of the best things that you can do for yourself is learn how to talk to a database. Usually the most commonly known and used one will be Google. And so here are a couple of tips that I'm going to show you how to use Google like an expert, right? This is by no means an exhaustive list. There are many, many shortcuts that you can learn to use when talking to Google. But the best ones that you can use to sort of shape your search are going to be, these ones here. So quotation marks will ask for an exact phrase. So something like, let's see, let's try. So when you search something in direct quotes, it's going to search for exactly those words in that order that you've given it. On the other hand, if you were to add in an asterisk, this is going to search for never gonna and then any word in here, you up. Typically this will give you the most common results as before. But if you add in more asterisks, we might start getting different results, right? Gonna pump you up here, and so on. But asterisks can also replace letters as well. So if we were to do something like environ M asterisk, this will look for everything that starts with these letters. So this can be environmental, environmentalists, environments, all kinds of things like that. Of course, you know, if you're not careful, this can get you results that you aren't actually interested in. So if you were to start with PINK, you might get pink, pinky, Pinkerton, anything that starts with those letters, right? All right, let's see, what else have I put up here? We've got a tilde for synonyms. So basically, what this is going to do is add in any word that it knows to associate with it. Usually Google is one of those search engines that's pretty good at finding synonyms. So if you were to put up USA, let's say pink USA, it will also know to search for United States of America, United States, America, American, things like that. But it does try to prioritize what you've put in there. If you go far enough, it'll start adding in what it thinks are going to be related to USA. But if you just tell it directly to add in synonyms, it will do that. So let's say horror movies. The first results are always going to include movies because it doesn't know which word is more important, right, in this search. If you were to add a tilde here, this will search horror movies, horror films, horror cinema, cinematic, so on. So now it knows that it can replace that word comfortably with things that are similar, right? If you wanted to exclude things, you can use a minus sign. So if you were to look up, let's say, Jaguar speed minus car, this will get you results for, hopefully, the animal, or it looks like a type of ship, maybe, here, used in the German Empire. But by excluding words like this, you can broaden your search without limiting it. So if you were to, you know, if you wanted to look up bat, but you weren't sure what else you wanted, like you wanted bat ecology, bat, you know, biology, things like that, but you don't know what you want to add, you can remove baseball to get more results of bat, the animal, right? So once you have words that you want included in here, it becomes much more easy to look up things about them, right? So if you are reading through the Wikipedia article, maybe you start taking Chiroptera. Maybe you want mammals, mammalian, that kind of thing to add to your search. So, let's see, what else? And or is going to include, it's going to basically open up the search. So, let's say bat or Chiroptera. This will now include results that have only bat, only Chiroptera, and results with both, right? So or is a very expansive search term. So it'll include all the things that you can think of here. So one way to do this for search engines that aren't as good as Google would be to do USA or United States or United States of America, and then add in a term, bat. So now this will search for bats and any of these keywords together. So it won't be as exclusionary, right? So those are just a few tips on how to use Google, and once you've learned how to really use Google, you will be able to talk to other search engines in a similar way. So more on that in other videos. This is just a brief introduction to research in general. So